Good morning. Welcome to Friday. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment. We begin this hour at the southern border. It was the backdrop for competing visits by the current president, Joe Biden, and the former one, Donald Trump. Now, yesterday's trips gave both men the chance to talk about border security and immigration, which will be a huge issue in the upcoming election. For his part, President Biden urged Congress to greenlight his bipartisan immigration bill and invited Mr. Trump to work with him to get that legislation passed.
Here's what I would say to Mr. Trump. Instead of playing politics with this issue, instead of telling members of Congress to block this legislation, join me, or I'll join you, in telling the Congress to pass this bipartisan border security bill. We can do it together. You know and I know it's the toughest, most efficient, most effective border security bill this country has ever seen. So instead of playing politics with the issue, why don't we just get together and get it done?
Let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist. So, Aaron, two very different visits in tone, in policy. Let's start with President Biden, who's faced a lot of criticism over his border policy. So what did he say during his trip to Brownsville yesterday? Tell us more about that invitation to Mr. Trump to try and work together.
Yeah, I think that appeal to former President Trump struck a lot of people, took a lot of people by surprise. We didn't expect to hear that. We had been told in the lead up to the president's trip to Brownsville, Texas, that he would be placing the blame for the legislation that failed to get through Congress in the hands of former President Trump. And certainly he did do that. But to hear him reach out and say, let's get together and figure out a way to get some legislation done and to get these resources to the border was something that a lot of people didn't expect. At the same time, as you noted, he called on Congress to take action. We know that the measure that had been moving through the Senate that would have provided about $20 billion in resources for Border Patrol agents, for immigration judges and asylum officers failed, and that was largely at the urging of former President Trump. At the same time, President Biden promised border agents that he visited with that the resources would be coming. He said, come hell or high water, he would get them what they need to deal with the broken border, as President Biden and President Trump have both called it, particularly in recent weeks, Joe.
Aaron, so we know Trump was more than 300 miles away. He was in Eagle Pass. What did he have to say? And since then, any response to the president's invitation when it comes to the immigration bill?
We did hear from former President Trump's press secretary about that invitation, the appeal from President Biden, and essentially the response was that President Biden should take responsibility for the crisis at the border, they said, and use his executive power to try to close the border down immediately, according to President Trump's press secretary. At the same time, they blamed President Biden's policies for crime that we're seeing across the country, in particular referencing the murder of a nursing student in Georgia. They say at the hands of an allegedly at the hands of an illegal migrant. I want you to hear a little bit more of what President Trump had to say about this issue.
Now the United States is being overrun by the Biden migrant crime. It's a new form of vicious violation to our country. It's migrant crime. We call it Biden migrant crime.
Now, our data teams did take a look at this. They looked at some of the available crime data from some of the cities that have seen the biggest influx of migrants recently. And the reality is that there's actually been a dip in crime in some of those large cities that have taken in large numbers of migrants, Joe.
Clearly, the fact that we're seeing these dueling visits on the same day is a sign this is going to be a huge issue in November. So let's talk about the polls. What do they tell us about how voters view these two men when it comes to immigration and border security?
Yeah, you see the numbers on your screen right there. When it comes to securing the border, voters believe that former President Trump would do a better job. He would do a better job at handling securing the border. When it comes to immigrant rights and the treatment, the humane treatment of people who are leaving their countries, oftentimes in crisis, and coming to the U.S. border and crossing into this country, people believe that President Biden would do a better job in handling that issue. And so we'll see which of those avenues really sort of rises to the top come election day in November, as this will be an issue, a big big issue for a lot of voters who will be making decisions about who they want to see as president next year, Joe.
All right, Aaron Gilchrist kicking us off this hour. Thank you so much. Now, both President Biden and former President Trump are facing some pretty strong headwinds when it comes to winning over black voters across the country. NBC News spoke with a focus group of black voters in North Carolina as part of our series, The Deciders. NBC News Washington correspondent Michelle Sindor explains why, when it comes to this year's likely choices, many voters can be described as double haters.
The major warning for both President Biden and former President Trump from a demographic that may prove critical in the 2024 election: black voters. A new focus group in North Carolina telling NBC News many of them will not vote for Trump, but they're not thrilled about Biden either, a political phenomenon known as double haters.
First thing that comes to mind, President Biden.
Old. Right?
Incompetent.
I look at him as kind of smug and entitled.
What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Donald Trump?
Crazy. Powerful. He's definitely racist.
The NBC News Deciders Focus Group, a collaboration with Engage's, Syracuse University, and Sago, finding that despite the black community's historic support for President Biden, these voters now have major reservations.
A lot of the things that they say are for blacks and for everybody, but they'll just say it's for blacks in the beginning.
I feel like some of this is performative.
The panelists at times struggling to name anything President Biden had done for the black community.
We all don't go to HBCUs. What are you doing for black students? Not just HBCUs.
Presented with the White House's messaging on Biden's work for the black community, the group panned his efforts to broadcast his accomplishments.
I think that it's all political mumbo jumbo.
Despite their harsh words for President Biden, most said they would vote for him. The group left some of their most biting criticism for former President Trump.
He's sexist. He's delusional. He's old as hell. Oh, I'm sorry. He's very old.
Especially over his recent remarks about the black community.
Then I got indicted a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time. And a lot of people said that that's why the black people like me, because they have been hurt so badly and discriminated against.
That's probably one of the most racist comments he's ever made.
It feels like he thinks we're all criminals.
It's like an insult. It's like, are you serious? That's what you think of us?
What do all you make of some Republican backers of Trump who say that Trump's marketing of sneakers appeals to black voters?
It's like a joke, not taking us seriously.
President Biden has always massively outperformed Trump among black voters. He polled ahead of Trump by nearly 60% in January's NBC News poll. But compared to where those numbers sat in the 2020 exits, his hold on the black vote is starting to slip. North Carolina, the state these voters call home, is in play in 2024 and could be the difference between re-election and a historic defeat for the president. Now the rise of the double haters raising a critical question. Will the black voters who have been in Biden's corner for years show up for him one more time in the most important election of his life?
Our thanks to Michelle Sindor for that report. Voters in North Carolina will head to the polls next week to vote for that state's primary, one of many taking place on Super Tuesday. Speaking of, we're going to have full coverage of Super Tuesday right here on NBC News Now. Gets underway next Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 o'clock Pacific time. From the campaign trail to the courtroom in the classified documents case against Mr. Trump in Florida. Today, the judge in that case, Aileen Cannon, will hear arguments from both special counsel Jack Smith and Trump's legal team on when that trial should start. Now, the trial date was set for May, but it needs to be moved because of all the other cases against the former president. Smith is suggesting a July date, while Trump's proposing an August start. But the filing from Team Trump also says they believe the trial should wait until after the November election. They also asked the judge to consider delaying the trial while the Supreme Court weighs the question of presidential immunity. The justices will hear arguments about that in April. In this case, Trump is accused of mishandling classified documents after his presidency ended. He has denied any wrongdoing and pleaded not guilty. The Republican-led House Oversight Committee has released the full transcript of Hunter Biden's closed-door testimony. The president's son testified on Wednesday. It was an hours-long deposition on Capitol Hill, part of the GOP's impeachment inquiry into Hunter's father, President Biden. House Republicans have alleged the president was involved in his son's business dealings. Biden has denied any wrongdoing. NBC News senior investigative producer Sarah Fitzpatrick joins us with the latest on this. Sarah, good morning. So the transcript of this testimony, it's more than 200 pages long with some redactions. In your reporting, you say it underscores the disconnect between what House Republicans have alleged are criminal actions by Hunter Biden and his father, and then the testimony that they made public. So break down what we're learning about this transcript.
Absolutely, Joe. This transcript is really a fascinating document for several reasons. The first is that it's kind of the first time that we're able to see all the evidence that Republicans say they have gathered. Bank records, memos, messages, emails, and kind of see them lay it all out and ask Hunter to respond. And in many cases, in fact, in all cases, it appears that the conclusions that they were making from those documents were either inaccurate or mischaracterized or just overall kind of taken out of context and unsupported. And so I think of course, it is possible that there's still more evidence to come, but it seems unlikely given that Republicans have talked about Hunter's testimony as the crescendo of this investigation, and they haven't indicated what else is coming. Secondly, I think what we saw in this testimony was a real confidence of Hunter Biden. He was very aggressive in his pushing back. He was emphatic about the fact that his father at no point had anything to do with his business dealings, nor did he profit from them financially or otherwise. In particular, there's one email that has been long kind of pointed to by Republicans in which Hunter said that his father was in the room with him. Hunter testified that that was not the case and that he believed that he was very high and in the depths of his addiction at that point. It was something he regretted, but not something that actually occurred.
So after everything that's happened this week, the transcript release, the deposition, what are we hearing from the chair of the Oversight Committee, Congressman James Comer?
So the chairman and other House Republicans are standing firm. Comer told us last night that he believed that Hunter's testimony showed that there was evidence of some of the things that they've been claiming and that there were inconsistencies in Hunter's statements versus other witnesses. I think he said that the committee is still moving forward with plans to hold a public hearing, although we're hearing from Republicans that they may not fully support that. So if that actually happens, we'll have to see what that entails and if they have the support to make it worthwhile.
All right, Sarah Fitzpatrick, thank you so much. We know you'll continue to stay on this and appreciate all of your reporting this week. In Texas, the deadly wildfire that has ravaged more than 1 million acres is now the second largest in U.S. history. It's known as the Smokehouse Creek Fire. It's the biggest in Texas history. Now, wildfires in Texas have killed at least 2 people. Now they're moving east, crossing into Oklahoma. At least 12 fires are burning there. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky is in Canadian Texas with the latest.
Yeah, Joe, a tough morning for so many here in the Texas Panhandle. And here in Canadian Texas, the flames may be out, at least for now, but that lingering smell of smoke marks so much loss for so many in this tight-knit Texas town. The Smokehouse Creek Fire is now the largest in state history. Authorities say it's burned 1.1 million acres and is at just 3% containment. There are other fires burning across the Texas Panhandle, and the concern here, while we had a bit of a break from the weather yesterday with even a snowstorm in some parts of the state, winds are picking back up today, and so are temperatures, and it just takes one spark to reignite a whole new front on this wildfire fight. Now, as for the current death toll, authorities say it stands at 2. We know that in one instance, an 83-year-old woman was killed when the fire overtook her home. And within the last 24 hours, authorities say another death took place when a woman was driving across the Panhandle and a fast-moving fire overtook her truck. Authorities say it is imperative for people in these communities to be absolutely aware of where the latest fronts are on these multiple blazes. President Biden saying in the last 24 hours that he is dispatching 500 federal personnel to assist in this ongoing fight, and that includes 100 wildland firefighters. which will no doubt be welcomed by the resources here in Texas. Many of the firefighting departments are volunteers, stretched very thin because of the vast expanse that this wildfire fight covers. We're talking about an area that is larger than from New York to Philadelphia, and that is just one of the 4 fires burning here today. Authorities say that as the humidity drops and the temperature goes back up, people need to understand that this firefight can change drastically. And right now, there is no one breathing easy here in this part of Texas, especially with a warm weekend forecast on the way. Joe?
All right, Morgan, thank you so much. On the West Coast, a very different story. Millions once again waking up to winter and wind alerts. Let's get a check on your morning news now weather with meteorologist Michelle Grossman. Michelle, good morning.
Hi, Joe. Great to see you. And we are talking a lot of snow. We could see up to 10 feet of snow in the highest elevations of the Sierras. So we're looking at blizzard conditions, whiteout conditions, impossible travel because we're going to see winds gusting up to 55, 60 miles per hour. And then along the coast, we're looking at really heavy rain. So this is satellite radar showing us lots of clouds. We're seeing the snow falling. That's in the blue. Also rain falling. We're seeing some yellows and reds popping in. That's showing us where we're seeing some heavy rain falling. And we're going to see even upwards of 10 inches of rain along the coast in terms of that rainfall. So 7 million people waking up to winter alerts. We have winter storm warnings. We have blizzard warnings. That is in the purple, and also some winter storm watches, not only today, but also through the weekends. Let's take you through it. Today, we're looking at that extremely heavy snow. We're looking at the winds blasting. That's going to bring down some power lines. It's going to create some power outages. Really cold, too, in the west. So that's not going to be a good scenario. Then we're looking at the whiteout conditions and possible travel because of that snow falling 1 to 2 inches per hour, in addition to the winds really blowing at times. Then as we go throughout tomorrow, those snowfall rates up to 2 to 4 inches per hour. So that snow is going to continue to pour down. And then we're looking at rounds of heavy rain soaking the coastal parts of California. But that rain also will extend up to Washington as well. We begin to taper off that snow into the Sierra Mountains. That's the good news. But feet of snow likely in the Central Rockies as we head towards Sunday. Now, the snowfall forecast, we mentioned a lot of snow. Snow amounts 5 to 10 feet above 5,000 feet. And then locally higher amounts as we go a little bit higher into the highest elevations of the mountains. In terms of that rainfall, it is a lot also. This is going to create a mess. We're looking at 5, even 10 inches of rain along portions of the coast of the Carolinas. I do want to mention the rain in the southeast as well. Notice those brighter colors, the darker colors. That's where we're expecting some heavy rainfall. So especially along the Carolina coast into the Gulf Coast states as well. But it's widespread. We're looking from the southeast into the Tennessee Valley, up into portions of the mid-Atlantic by overnight tonight, and then kind of look what happens tomorrow. It's a soaker today in the southeast, a bit of wintry weather in the Appalachians and the higher elevations there. And then as we go throughout tomorrow, Joe, it's going to be a wet start to the weekend. We're looking at just damp and dreary in the mid-Atlantic, the Northeast on Saturday, but looking to be a nice end to the weekend.
All right, so I'm making indoor plans for most of the weekend, and then Sunday night I'll go run around outside.
Exactly.
All right, sounds good. Michelle, thank you so much.
Sure.
International outrage is growing after an incident that left at least 100 people dead and hundreds more injured while they were waiting for food in Gaza City yesterday. That's according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. NBC News has not been able to independently verify that death toll, and it's unclear how many people died from the stampede or the gunfire that followed. United Nations officials are condemning the incident, saying they have not been able to deliver aid in the region for more than a week. Gaza is on the brink of a famine, prompting some nations to consider airdropping aid to help Gazans on the ground. The White House is continuing to push for progress in hostage negotiations between Israel and Hamas, but officials say the aid convoy deaths have now complicated those efforts. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter joins us now from London with the latest. Molly, good morning. So what are we learning about this incident and how it broke out in Gaza City? I know there are opposing accounts from Palestinian officials and Israeli officials.
Yeah, Joe, that's exactly right. And I think you laid it out really well. I think what should not be lost is just how desperate the people are, specifically in this area and specifically in northern Gaza, for aid trucks, which is why there were such huge crowds. So what Gazan officials are saying are that more than 100 people were killed, nearly 800 were injured when huge crowds which were gathered and waiting for aid trucks when Israeli troops opened fire on those crowds. Now, one Palestinian eyewitness tells NBC News Show, and this is reporting specifically to our team, he says that Israeli troops opened fire on the crowds before the trucks arrived. Now, doctors at the hospitals in Gaza City, limited hospitals, limited facilities are even operating in Gaza City, say there were gunshot wounds. Now, the Israeli military says there was chaos, that there was stampede, that most of the injuries and the deaths happened in that. The gunshots, they say, and they do say Israeli troops fired warning shots. They also say there were 2 incidents that were separate. Now, take a listen to what State Department spokesperson Matt Miller had to say.
When it comes to establishing facts on the ground, we are urgently seeking additional information on exactly what took place. We have been in touch with the Israeli government since early this morning and understand that an investigation is underway. We will be monitoring that investigation closely and pressing for answers.
Joe, again, I think what really should not be lost in this is that we have seen videos in the last couple of weeks of huge crowds crowding around these trucks. Trucks have rarely been able to get into northern Gaza, really just underscoring the serious desperation of the people there.
Yeah, and because of that, as we mentioned, several nations are considering the possibility of actually airdropping aid into Gaza. I mean, walk us through more of just how dire the situation is, and is that something the U.S. would also consider?
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary because the land crossings, because the trucks, like the ones we saw in the incident yesterday, are having such a hard time getting to the people who need this aid most. Jordan and the UK, for example, have both resorted to aid drops, some more successful than others. We saw some video last week, actually, of aid drops missing their targets. But U.S. officials have told NBC News the Biden administration is considering airdrops. And this comes, and Joe, we have been reporting on this for the last couple of weeks, of kind of the looming famine that is arriving. The UN now warns that a quarter of the population, so just over 500,000 people, are, quote, one step away from famine. But you can see in these videos just how desperate people are for flour, for anything that they can feed their families.
And hovering over all this is the negotiations. We know President Biden held phone calls with leaders in both Qatar and Egypt to try and discuss the future of negotiations with Hamas. The president seemed confident earlier this week. How do things look now?
That's right. So we heard the president even say while he was eating ice cream, Joe, we all saw that clip, that there should be, or he hoped that there would be a deal by Monday. He's now walking that back, saying it doesn't look like there might be a deal as early as Monday. But he did hold some calls. We actually have a readout from the White House of his call with the Qatari prime minister, who's obviously playing a very important role, who talks about, obviously, the tragic and alarming incident yesterday. They grieved the loss of civilian lives and agreed that this incident underscored the urgency of bringing negotiations to a close as soon as possible and expanding the flow of humanitarian assistance into Gaza. The incident yesterday clearly does a couple of things. Not only does it erode trust, of course, between some of the main players at the table, really complicates negotiations. If you listen to the White House and you look at Sisi, Egypt's readout, and the Qatari readout, but it also underscores the need, this real desperate need for a deal that not only releases hostages, not only calls for a ceasefire, but also gets some much-needed aid into the people that need it most.
All right. Molly Hunter, thanks as always for your reporting.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.